All right, everyone, we have a update on the patch notes. This is for OPR. One Page Rules has made some updates to OPR for 3.2. This happened over the weekend. Spent the weekend reviewing the notes, going through some of the armies, and I want to talk about some of the changes that I think are good, some things that perhaps I think are some concerns. And overall, just maybe looking at some specific armies that I think probably benefited and some of them that I think got hurt. So before I get into this, I have some things I think they did right, some things that I think perhaps are going in the wrong direction. But one of the things I can say is that I appreciate the spirit of 3.2 changes. I think that they are noticing some things that are happening. And while I may not agree with every one of the changes, I think that they are thinking in the right direction. So this is the page that I'll be going through. I won't get into balance validation. They did make that standard as part of everything, which is I think is a big changes, and also did a lot of balance validation. You can definitely tell that the team is at work doing a lot of work to make balance validation a very important part of list building for custom creators. Also bringing their own lists in line with balance validation is a very important thing. So balance validation is just really good that they put into it. They gave you the UI that they did for their custom army creator just also explains how to fix it as well. I did some of those fixes on my own lists for some of them this past weekend. So yeah, you can read some of the blurbs that go into here. I'm going to keep this, I'm going to focus more on just the line by line stuff here. So let's just get into it. So first of all, grammar updates and typos is great. I love that they added in a new book describing terrain placement. We've talked about this in the past on the podcast with other guests, but terrain placement is such an important part of the game that I really think it's important that they did make a point to get into this more. It's important. Skirmish games, non-stun units that fail morale press or stunned. I think it's okay. I personally, I don't think the skirmish games are really that balanced anyway, but I think this can help. Yeah, it's fine. I think it's a step in the right direction. Again, I don't view these games as sort of competitive anyway. So when I talk about these things, I want to be clear. I am talking about these changes in light of a competitive side of OPR. So, if you are sort of a fun player, a lot of this stuff may not be interesting to you. But if you're more of a person who's interested in playing OPR more competitively, I think these are some of my thoughts are sort of focused on. So keep that in mind. Clarified casters, I think that's fine. Yeah. I love the limited rule set. They have added in this limited rule here. I think this is a great change. I've seen it on some units already that I think are terrific on. I have actually think that limited can be a great way that maybe we can start addressing some things like the hybrid and pistol tax, making those weapons limited. So I think there's a lot of good ideas coming from limited. Like it, impact was clarified to not be an attack and not usable when fatigue. I think it's them not being usable when it's fatigued is a minor nerf. They were already hitting on sixes when they were fatigued anyway. The clarified as an attack is okay. I think it may cause some more confusion about when is something is actually an ability. I don't know. It feels sort of wordy. I would have been okay just impact staying in an attack, but I think it's fine if they clarify it. It did nerf impact further, which I think was a little unnecessary, but yeah, it's fine. I mean, maybe in Age of Fantasy, I don't know. I think that the impact I think was minor, but it is a further nerf. So a big change that happened that I have some strong opinions on it is the rending and the poison wounds that just can't be regenerated. So I really am concerned. This is probably on all the changes I think I'm the most concerned about is, rending and I think that there is just going to be some problems trying to balance a game when you have these weapons that are sort of these hard counters to other rules. and you're trying to balance that from perspective. I go back to some of my previous comments about rending and all this poison, and that is to just remove the counter to regen altogether. That's just my thoughts on it. I think that it has brought up these points up in points, and it's actually so I play high elf fleets, and it's sort of further made this army more problematic, and that they're really paying some pretty high pistol taxes. I do like this though. This is something that I think several of the community have been asking for, including myself, which is that they did need to adjust rending that it scales with quality. Of course, rending on a quality 5 and 6 unit is going to be a lot better as a percent of their damage than a quality 2 or 3 unit, because every hit that you hit, if you have rending on a quality 6, is basically counting as AP4. So I did like that they made these changes. In other words, making rending more expensive for higher quality units. That's great. Entrenching and stealth, I think, is a great change. Stealth and especially stealth was almost useless at 12 inches. It was just a pointless rule. So I really like that they brought it down to 9. I would prefer if they would have brought it to 6. I think 6 inches would have been better, but I can also appreciate a more graduated approach to this. So I'm not going to complain about it. I think we play it at 9 inches. I'm always of the opinion I would have loved some of these changes to be a little more drastic, but I can appreciate the more graduated approach. Try it out. We've got 3 months, so I can appreciate that. I love this change. So this is something that I know I've complained about, which is that debuff spells are just universally worse than buff spells. So I love that they've added 6 inches. I would have loved to have gone further. I would have loved to have taken some of these buff spells that have an 18-inch range and actually knocked them down 6 inches. I think that, again, I'm okay with this graduated change. I would have liked them to have taken a bit step further and to say, some of these buff spells, these level 3s and level 2s that have an 18-inch range, there's really no counterplay to that. I think of like the level 3 regen one that's 18 inches, the level 3 movement buff that's 18 inches. I'd love to bring them down to 12, but I still think this is a change in the right direction, and I really like this. Regiments, I think this is something that a lot of people were playing anyway, but I'm glad they're doing a good job about sort of codifying some of these no-brainer changes. I don't know what this is about. I don't follow campaign rules. All right, let's get into some specific changes for armies. Alien hives, balance. I won't get into the balance validation. Good. All in all, when you see balance validation, good. Okay. Venom floaters. This is good. That's fine. I mean, Battle Brothers. So this is a big change that I really like. This is something that I've been making in my own custom armies, and that is not all vehicles could or should have impact 6. A tank, that's an impact 6. A light truck should have a lower impact. And I love that they're doing this on all their light vehicles. They're bringing down the impact on them. They're starting to make so from a competitive standpoint, vehicles in Grimdark aren't good. They have too many rules sort of tacked onto them, that they're very sort of inefficient from a competitive standpoint to bring a vehicle, especially vehicles that are like more long range support. When you tack on the fast, when you tack on the impact 6, when you tack on the armor 2 up, it sort of makes them. So I love that they're starting to make vehicles more graduated. Again, I would have loved for them to gone further. I'd have loved to have seen some vehicles with armor 3. I'd have loved to see some vehicles that all don't have fast. And they actually did that on a couple of them, where they're starting to sort of drop the fast, put in some bounding. That's really great. So I think this is a step in the right direction. It's not as drastic as I would have liked, but it's good. So really like that they're doing this. Love this. All right. Battle Brothers, all in general. Balance validation, Assault Walker getting scalped. I do like that. That's actually really interesting. Blood Sisters are a super good army, so I don't mind it. Support Walker getting protected, super cool. I like that. Yeah, I mean, Blood Sisters are already good. This is definitely some buffs to them, but I also think that the support walkers for Blood Sisters are sort of not that good. So I like some minor buffs to them. Yeah, Hover Tank getting impact tank. This is fine. Jet bike, the same thing. We won't get into all these impact rates. I've just discussed it. All right. Dwarf guilds, I felt that dwarf guilds really, before a new army, really had some problems, and I appreciate that this came out and that they've already addressed something, which was that Magma was such a crappy rule. I mean, it was a really crappy rule. So I love that they've added on this thing, basically giving it a Magma and Reap. Again, I still don't like that these counter rules, but I appreciate that now Magma is useful than just being that. So that's great. They've added the elites. I looked at this. So what it is, the elites now have axes for hammers and reworked them. So I looked at them. The elites, I don't know. For me, I want to get into them, and I don't like this change. So there are 100 points. That's pretty cheap for a hand-to-hand squad, and for a squad that is called elites, I definitely would have preferred if they had more hitting power and were more expensive. Like just calling them elites and they're only 100 points for five feels not that. They've sort of I would have loved to see Heat Hammers go up to AP2 with two attacks. They sort of split the difference and then they put one attack with AP2, which is pretty bad. And then they give you two attacks with no APs. I don't know. I don't like either of the changes, I'll be honest. I have a custom army that I added in the Stone Elites, and I think this is a much better option to either just give them energy axes with AP2 and rending, or just give them a heat hammer with AP1 and magma. So both of these are about 145. 145 is starting to get into the elite infantry range. So again, I appreciate that they're recognizing that elites weren't good and that they are trying to make some changes. I just think that they should just, hey, make dwarf elites actually really good. Let people pay the points for them. That's my 2 cents on that. Yeah, magma is generally good. Elven gestures fine. Eternal Dynasty, Lost, it's fine. Ninja Walker, I do like that they've added in some buffs. I appreciate this. Yeah, that's all good. Plague Disciple, so this is the other change that we'll get into, and we see it other places, which is that I don't like so for one, I like that they have nerfed Plague Disciples in an extent that they don't have regen on the entire army. Regen all armies were a problem in the previous edition. I'm happy that they addressed it. They've addressed two things. One, they've addressed armies that have all regen, and then they have addressed the Blessing of Plague, which is the +1 regen. 4-up regions on some of these armies were just too powerful. So I like it. I just wish that like they've increased the points in rending and made it a harder counter, and then they've made rending more useless, like a lot less useful because all these like they've given it a hard counter, which is a buff to rending. They've increased the points while simultaneously massively removing regen from a lot of units. I don't know. I don't have a feeling about it. The other thing I think is a little clunky with these and Robot Legions is when you give regen to these units, now you're rolling 3 dice for defense. You're rolling an armor save, you're rolling a putrid save, and then you're rolling a regen save if you bought them. You can also buy the spell ward upgrade. So, and if you give them regen, you can end up like with you can find ways to actually give a unit that has putrid, you can give it a regen save, you do a spell, and then you can give it a spell eater save so that this units can be rolling 4 dice for each event. It feels very clunky. Like I don't know. I would have much rather them take all the rending, poison, and magma and just remove the counter and then just call it all regen. So it's just my point over it. High Elf fleets definitely took a nerf actually with the it's a secondary nerf that with rending basically getting point cost upgrades, High Elf fleets they weren't in a good spot already. I think that they're in a worse spot now. I'm saying this, I know that they are announcing High Elf fleets as a possible unit they'll be working on next, and it's a great opportunity. I'll just point out some things that I think that need work with High Elf fleets. So, the renaming of the units is okay. I'm going to call them by their original name, which is fine. The Scorpion weapons is a minor thing. Scorpions are still pretty bad. Just them having impact got further nerfed. I have a custom army, which is just give them 2 attacks with poison. I gave them a stinger upgrade, which is devour. I don't know. Scorpions with 1 attack and impact are just they've gotten worse, and I would just drop that. But anyway, that's a tangential point. I want to show you something that this rending buff and increase, it's really making a lot of high elf fleets units just very inefficient. So here we've got some banshees, which are called revenants. They are 185 now. That is super expensive for these guys. I want to compare them to another unit from Machine Cult, which is the Sect Stalkers. I'll just give you a second fast and let me do this. Okay, so there's these other units. So they're the same thing, fast, furious, and they have fast and strider, but these guys also have furious. They're 30 points less than these revenants. Now that is 30 points on this pistol tax for these guys. It's way too expensive. These guys get furious too, and they're 30 points less versus 185 for banshees. So really hope that with high elf fleets, they really do need to address the pistol tax on these units. Because the army is in a pretty bad spot from a competitive standpoint. So yeah, just some thoughts over that. I know this is coming out. Love them to address some of these issues right here. Just way too expensive on the pistol tax here. And I will have some separate videos about that. All right, Human Defense Force. Great. Infantry can take 2 options. I really like this. I never liked that they were stuck to just one. Like, give them a radio and a medic. That's also all the models are done. That's great. Human Inquisition is a pointless army. What do we have here? Machine Cult. That's a good change. And the Crawler Tank Life. This is one of these things I'm pointing out. I like that they are starting to see that a lot of these vehicles are just useless. I like that they're starting to drop some of the fast. And like I completely agree. A lot of these vehicles don't need fast. If you want to make vehicles competitive, you've got to stop dropping all this bundled special abilities. Orc Marauders. Yep, that's fine. Just a minor thing. Prime Brothers, I like that they've reduced it. They're trying to deal, like, they're reducing some of the melee attacks on these units. Like, I think they're starting to realize that hybrid units they're trying to give a little points to these units, which is good. Prime Brothers are another unit that's just in a bad spot. So Robot Legions, this is another thing that got changed a lot. I did a battle report on it, and I do like the changes about Robot Legions. Robot Legions, to be frank, were sort of they were really getting close to being a broken army with the 4 regions. So I really like this change. Glad that they've removed the +1 region, just region instead. They've added self-repair on vehicles. Yeah, this is great. I also like this as well. Love that warriors, like, they had way too many quality 4 units in their army. Robot snakes, snipers, hover bikes, like all of them being quality 3 was just really rough. They dropped them to quality 4, which I think is better. Reduce the hover bikes defense. This is another thing. Hover bikes were super powerful, 3/3s. So I do like that hover bikes got a nerf. They needed to. Hover bikes were super powerful. They didn't nerf some of the other problematic. I think Guardians are still weren't changed, and so were Immortals. But that's fine. I still think it's a move in the right direction. Sarny Host got some buffs, which I think are good. Love this change. Spike Lizard did need a buff. Needed to have a defense and heavy shield. Spike Lizard is really important for the army with the Primal Roar, so I did glad they gave us some defense on there. Bounding instead of fast is good. That's fine. Soul Snatchers, nothing changed, which is fine. It's a good army. I haven't looked at Titan Lords. From a competitive standpoint, I don't really pay a lot of attention to them. Wormhole Demons, again, we've already talked about those changes. So Grimdark Future, like I said, I think overall these changes are good for Grimdark Future. I have some concerns about, like, there are all these non-region region saves now, but overall I do like the changes, and I think that they can be further tweaked from there. All right, so let's get into Age of Fantasy. Age of Fantasy, I think in general is a more balanced game. So Duchess of Vinci is probably one of these armies that did suffer from the rending tax. But Duchess of Vinci were also probably too good. Dwarfs, I do like this, having an AP on your Berserker Lord. Berserker Lord needed a buff. He was really bad. Ghostly Undead, same thing. I don't, again, the ethereal thing, I personally don't like ethereal from a new player perspective, like a rule that sort of just bundles up a few other rules. I would rather them just write out the rules. So that's my opinion. It's that's more of a taxonomical argument that I think is more going to confuse new players. But overall, I like the changes, the ghostly undead. I love this, by the way. I think this should be a standard. I don't like shield wall as an upgrade. It's underpointed for the fact that spells now aren't a big deal. So I think the heavy armor is just should replace shield wall. So I'm glad they added this in that just need to replace shield wall with heavy armor. More units can take this Spell Eater option. So this is a thing with Spell Eater. I don't like the changes to the Spell Eater, which it used to be a 6-up save and a 4-up save against spells. Spells now save spells on a 2-up. That increases the points on this. Now, I'm okay if they made spell like I would with these changes, they really need to take these spells like Spell Eater and make it an option for everything because I don't like where they're going and having some of these rules be more hard counter to other rules. So I would prefer it as an option. Who this really hurts the most is Knight Brothers. Knight Brothers were already in a bad spot as far as an army goes, and now they've gotten further effectively nerfed because they are stuck with this Spell Eater that's been increased in points and it's a 2-up. It's a hard counter. Like I disagree with where they're going with this. We'll give it a shot, but I think that this is a nerf to Knight Brothers, who already were a pretty bad army. So, like I said, you could just look at some of the points on these guys. I mean, 250 for Knight Brothers is just ridiculous. So yeah, that's just my opinion on that. I don't like where they're going on it, but I do appreciate that this would be okay if they moved all this to an option for everything and give Knight Brothers, I mean, take their Aegis and just turn this into just a 6-up save and let them buy a Spell Eater as an option. So that's my opinion on that. All right, some buff changes which are good. I think this is fine. Assassins can now have but must pick either surprise attack or takedown. That's actually good. You really could stack a way too much on one thing. That's a good change for Fanatics. So this is a good one. Plague Disciples we've already talked about. Kingdom of Angels now have their instead of region, which is fine. Rift Demons we've already talked about. Shadow Stalkers, they've renamed Undead to Shadowburn, which I think is unnecessary. I don't know. I would rather just stay undead. They have been renaming some units, which is fine. Ethereal, we already talked about it. They've added some new units for the changes to Kings of War, so that's appreciated. They added some weapon options for if you're a Kings of War player, you'll know that they basically updated the rules for this army to match the changes that Mantic did. Vampiric Undead, I like the Werewolf Champion. I think that's great. They reworked the Skeleton Champion, separate upgrades. That's good. I love that they've given Ghoul units Strider. Ghouls were in a pretty bad spot, and Undead did need some more Strider units. So I do like that they've added Strider on Ghouls. Yeah. Like I said, for the most part, I have some good and bad opinions. I can understand the spirit of where they're going. I may not agree with every change, but I think that they've got the right idea. So overall, I'll be looking. I mean, I've already tried out my first game this past weekend. I'll be trying out more games. So yeah, thanks everyone.